Detective Ray Holbrook knew death when he saw it. But Martha Kellaway's corpse made him shiver in ways many years of police work hadn't prepared him for. Her eyes were bloody. Blood vessels had exploded like tiny fireworks behind her bulging eyeballs, painting the whites crimson. Her tongue, black and swollen, hung from her mouth. The finger marks around her throat weren't just bruises, they were burned into her flesh. 6 perfect black prints that went straight through to the bone. But it was her face that haunted Ray. Martha had died screaming, but her mouth was twisted into what looked almost like a smile, as if in her final moments she had seen something that filled her with terrible joy. "Jesus Christ," Ray whispered, crouching beside the body in the freezing kitchen of the rotting house on Corpun Island. "Found her like this at dawn," said Officer Peters, his voice shaking. Door was wide open, but "Detective, look at her feet." Ray looked down. Martha's feet were bloody stumps. Her toenails had been ripped off, her flesh torn to shreds. It looked like she had clawed her way across 50 yards of jagged rocks to reach her front door. "There's a blood trail," Peters continued. "Starts at the old cemetery, goes right to her house, like something dragged her home to die." The October wind howled through the broken windows of the house, carrying the smell of rotting seaweed and something else, something that reminded Ray of burned hair and spoiled meat. "Tell me about the knocking," Ray said. Peters went even paler. "Started 3 nights ago. Mrs. Harvey next door. She called me crying. Said something was knocking on Martha's door at exactly 3 a.m. But when she looked out her window," Peters swallowed hard. "She said she saw Martha standing in her doorway. Just standing there, letting something tall and black knock on her forehead 3 times, like it was blessing her." Ray felt ice in his veins. "Mrs. Harvey saw this?" "All 3 nights," said Martha. "Never moved, never screamed, just stood there and let it happen. And each night the thing got bigger." Ray examined Martha's forehead. There, burned into the skin above her eyebrows, were 3 perfect circles. They went deep, deeper than any human finger could press. The flesh around them was charred black. "I need to talk to Mrs. Harvey," Ray said, "and I need the files on every death that's happened on this island in the last 50 years. "Detective," Peters whispered, "there's something else." After Mrs. Harvey saw Martha at the door that first night, she started hearing the knocking too, at her own house. Ray could feel it the moment he stepped off the ferry. The air tasted wrong, thick and oily, like breathing through a wet cloth soaked in blood. The 47 people who still called this place home moved like sleepwalkers, their eyes hollow and distant. The island stretched 3 miles of black rock and dead grass into the North Atlantic. No trees grew here anymore. The soil was too poisoned, too saturated with something that made plants wither and die. Even the seabirds avoided Corpun, leaving the skies empty and silent. Ray set up in the Anchor Inn, a building so old and rotten that the walls wept black moisture. Eleanor Vance, the owner, was a stick-thin woman with nervous eyes that never stopped moving. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, pouring Ray coffee that looked like motor oil. "Especially not in October. October is when it feeds." "It?" Eleanor's hands shook as she set down the pot. "The thing that takes people. Been taking them for longer than anyone remembers. My grandmother used to say it came with the first settlers, back in the 1800s. Came hungry." Ray pulled out his notebook. "Tell me about Martha Kellaway." Eleanor's face crumpled. "Martha was a good woman, kept to herself, never hurt nobody. But 3 weeks ago she started acting strange. Started talking to empty rooms, started laughing at nothing, and then," Eleanor wiped her eyes with a dirty rag. "Then she started visiting the old cemetery, every night, just walking around the graves, whispering." "Whispering what?" "Names, detective. She was whispering names, names of people who died here. Names that nobody alive should know." That afternoon, Ray walked the cemetery. It was older than the official records suggested. Much older. Some graves had dates from the 1600s, carved into stones so weathered they were barely readable. But what disturbed Ray most was how fresh some of the graves looked, despite bearing dates from centuries past. And there were too many of them. Far too many for an island that had never held more than 100 people. As the sun set, painting the sky the color of dried blood, Ray counted graves. He stopped at 300. Every single one bore the same mark carved above the name, 3 small circles arranged in a triangle. The mark of the knocker. Mrs. Harvey was 93 years old and hadn't slept in 3 days. She sat in her kitchen, clutching a rosary with arthritic fingers, her eyes fixed on the window that faced Martha Kellaway's house. "It started with the children," she whispered when Ray asked about the island's history. "Back in 1847, the famine ship Mercy's End wrecked on our rocks. 37 prisoners on board, all condemned to hang, but they never made it to the gallows." Ray leaned forward. "What happened to them?" "They made a deal with something old and hungry, something that had been sleeping under our island for 1,000 years. They fed it the ship's crew, and it gave them new life. But not the kind of life God intended." Mrs. Harvey's fingers traced the rosary beads compulsively. "They didn't age after that, didn't need food or sleep, but they got hungry for other things. They got hungry for souls." "You're saying the prisoners became what? Demons?" "Worse than demons, detective. Demons at least remember they're evil. These things, they think they're holy. They think they're saving people by taking them." Mrs. Harvey pointed to Martha's house. "See that basement window? The one that's always dark?" Ray looked. There was indeed a basement window, and unlike every other window in the house, no light had ever come from it. Not even when the police had searched the house with flashlights. "That window looks into hell," Mrs. Harvey said. "Martha spent 3 nights down there before she died, 3 nights learning her new purpose." "Which was?" Mrs. Harvey's voice dropped to a whisper. "To choose the next one." As if summoned by her words, a sound echoed across the island. A sound Ray had been dreading. Knock, knock, knock. It was 3 a.m., and it was coming from Mrs. Harvey's front door. Mrs. Harvey went rigid when the knocking started. Her eyes rolled back in her head, showing only whites, and when she spoke, her voice came out in a chorus of different voices. Young and old, male and female, all speaking at once. "The time of choosing has come, the debt must be paid, the hungry one stirs." Ray drew his gun, but Mrs. Harvey was already standing, moving toward the front door with jerky, puppet-like steps. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was patient, deliberate, like something savoring the fear it was creating. Ray grabbed Mrs. Harvey's arm, but her skin was ice-cold and hard as stone. She didn't even seem to notice him as she reached for the door handle. "Don't open it," Ray said, but Mrs. Harvey's arm kept moving. Through the frosted glass, Ray could see a shadow. It was impossibly tall, stretching up past the door frame and into the darkness above. And it wasn't alone. There were other shadows behind it, crowding the porch, waiting. Mrs. Harvey opened the door. The thing standing on the porch had once been human. Ray could see that in its basic shape, in the tattered remains of 19th century prison clothes that hung from its skeletal frame. But everything else was wrong. Its limbs were too long, stretched like taffy. Its fingers extended nearly to the ground, ending in nails that looked more like black claws. Its face was a ruin of rotted flesh and exposed bone, but its eyes burned with an unholy light that made Ray's vision swim. "Mrs. Harvey," Mrs. Harvey spoke, and its voice was like grinding glass. "Your time has come." Mrs. Harvey nodded and stepped forward. The thing placed one impossibly long finger against her forehead, and Ray watched in horror as it burned through her skin, leaving a perfect black circle. Knock. Another finger, another circle burned into her flesh. Knock. A third finger, a third circle. Knock. Mrs. Harvey's scream was cut short as her throat collapsed. But she didn't fall. Instead, she straightened up, her eyes now burning with that same unholy light. 3 marks for the chosen, she said in a voice that was no longer her own. 3 nights for the teaching, 3 souls for the feeding. Ray tried to run, but found he couldn't move. The thing that had been Mrs. Harvey turned toward him, and when she smiled, her teeth had become pointed fangs. "You will watch, detective," she said. "You will learn, and when the teaching is complete, you will choose." Ray found himself back in his room at the inn, though he had no memory of how he got there. His gun was gone. His phone was dead. The windows wouldn't open, and the door handle burned his hand when he tried to touch it. He was trapped. Eleanor Vance brought him food, but she moved like a sleepwalker, her eyes empty and distant. The food itself was wrong. Meat that moved slightly when he poked it, bread that felt warm and wet like living flesh. "You need to eat," Eleanor said in a voice like grinding stone. "You need to be strong for the choosing." "What choosing?" Ray demanded, but Eleanor had already left. That night, at exactly 3 a.m., Ray heard Mrs. Harvey's voice echoing through the inn's walls. "Come and see, detective. Come and learn what Martha learned." Against his will, Ray found himself walking downstairs and out into the night. The island was different now. The grass moved without wind, writhing like snakes. The air shimmered with heat that had nothing to do with temperature. And the smell was like an open grave. Mrs. Harvey stood in the center of the island's main street, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Martha Kellaway, her throat a ruin of torn flesh, but her eyes bright with terrible purpose. And behind Martha stood others, dozens of them, all wearing the mark of 3 burned circles on their foreheads. "Welcome to the congregation, detective," Mrs. Harvey said. "We are the chosen of the hungry one. We are the harvesters of souls." She gestured toward the cemetery, where Ray could now see lights moving between the gravestones. Not electric lights, something organic and pulsing like the bioluminescence of deep-sea creatures. "Each grave holds a story," Mrs. Harvey continued. "Each death feeds the one who sleeps below. And soon, very soon, it will have enough strength to wake fully." Ray tried to speak, but found his voice was gone. "You want to know what lies beneath our island, detective? Come and see." The entrance to the caves was hidden beneath the cemetery's oldest mausoleum. Mrs. Harvey touched the stone door with one burning finger, and it swung open to reveal stairs carved from black rock, descending into absolute darkness. The chosen ones moved down the stairs like a funeral procession, and Ray found himself following despite every instinct screaming at him to run. The air grew thicker as they descended, filled with a sweet, cloying smell that reminded Ray of flowers left too long on a grave. The stairs went deeper than should have been possible, deeper than the island itself. Ray could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness, and something else, a sound like breathing, slow and deep and impossibly vast. Finally, they emerged into a cavern so large that Ray's flashlight beam couldn't find the far walls. But what he could see made his sanity almost leave him. The cavern floor was covered in bones, not just human bones, though there were plenty of those, but the bones of things that had never walked on God's earth. Twisted skeletons with too many limbs, skulls with eye sockets in impossible places, rib cages that curved in directions that hurt to look at. And in the center of it all, partially buried in the mound of bones, was something that Ray's mind refused to fully comprehend. It was massive, easily the size of a building, with flesh that looked like melted wax, and eyes that were just holes in reality. It wasn't dead. Ray could see it breathing, see its flesh ripple with each slow inhalation. "The hungry one," Mrs. Harvey whispered with reverence. "It came from the deep places between the stars, long before man walked the earth. It has been sleeping for millennia, dreaming of the day it would wake to feed on all the world's souls." One of the creature's eyes opened. It was the size of a car, and when it looked at Ray, he felt something fundamental break inside his mind. You see, it spoke without words, its voice echoing inside Ray's skull. "You understand. I have been patient, I have been kind, I have taken only what is offered." "But now it grows impatient," Martha Kellaway said, her ruined voice joining the conversation. "Now it needs more than the occasional offering. It needs the whole island, every soul. And you, detective, will help us gather them." Ray tried to shake his head but found he couldn't move. "You will return to the surface. You will call for help. And when they come, when the rescue teams and the investigators and the curious arrive, they will join our congregation." "No," Ray managed to whisper. The creature's laughter was like continents grinding together. "You have no choice. The mark is already upon you." Ray looked down at his hands. There, burned into his palms, were 3 black circles. When had that happened? Hell. 3 marks for the chosen. 3 nights for the teaching. 3 souls for the feeding. "Tonight is the 2nd night," Mrs. Harvey said. "Tomorrow night, you will understand your purpose." Ray woke up in his room at the inn, but he wasn't alone. Martha Kellaway sat in the chair by the window, her head tilted at an impossible angle, her ruined throat making wet clicking sounds as she breathed. "Good morning, detective," she said, her voice bubbling up through the hole in her neck. "Ready for your lessons?" Ray tried to speak, but found that his voice came out as a whisper. What are you teaching me?" Martha smiled, revealing teeth that had rotted to black stumps. The beauty of service, the joy of feeding, the peace that comes with surrender. She stood and walked to the window, her movements jerky and unnatural. Look outside, detective. See how beautiful the world becomes when you stop fighting it. Ray looked. The island was transforming. The dead grass had been replaced by something that looked like veins, pulsing with dark fluid. The houses were changing too, their walls bulging outward like infected wounds. And the people. The people were no longer people. They moved in perfect synchronization, their limbs extending and contracting like rubber bands. Their faces had been replaced by smooth skin marked only by 3 burned circles where their features used to be. We are becoming something greater, Martha said, something pure, something that serves a purpose beyond the petty concerns of human existence. Ray felt his own face and was horrified to find that his features were beginning to smooth out. His nose was flattening, his mouth was sealing shut. Don't fight it, Martha cooed. Fighting only makes it hurt more. But Ray did fight. With every ounce of will he had left, he fought against the transformation. He bit his tongue until blood filled his mouth. He dug his fingernails into his palms until the pain became a bright, clean thing that cut through the fog in his mind. And suddenly, he could move again. Ray lunged for the window, smashing it with his fist. Glass cut his hands, but the pain felt like salvation. He could feel his humanity returning, could feel his face reforming into its proper shape. Martha shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and lunged at him. But Ray was already climbing out the window, falling 2 stories to the ground below. He landed hard, feeling something crack in his ribs, but he was alive. He was still human. And he had 1 night left to find a way to stop the horror that was consuming Quirpon Island. Ray limped through the transformed landscape of the island, searching for something, anything, that might help him fight back. But everywhere he looked, he saw signs that humanity was losing its grip on this place. The old church had become something obscene, its steeple twisted into a spiral that hurt to look at. The harbor was filled with black water that moved in patterns that suggested vast intelligence. And the people were gone. In their place were things that walked on too many legs, their faces blank except for the 3 burned circles that marked them as chosen. Ray found himself at the island's small library, drawn by a desperate hope that he might find some record of how to fight the thing beneath the island. The building looked normal from the outside, but when he pushed open the door, he found that the interior had been transformed into something like a cathedral. The bookshelves stretched impossibly high, filled not with books but with human skulls, each one marked with 3 circles. At the far end of the room, where the librarian's desk should have been, stood a figure Ray recognized. William Creedy, the man Eleanor had mentioned in passing. The man who had lived on the island longer than anyone could remember. But this wasn't the elderly hermit Ray had been told about. This was something ancient and terrible, wearing the shape of a man like an ill-fitting suit. Its skin was transparent, revealing the darkness that moved beneath. Its eyes were holes in its face that seemed to go down forever. "Detective Holbrook," it said in a voice like wind through a graveyard. "I've been waiting for you." Ray tried to run, but found his feet rooted to the floor. "You want answers," Creedy continued. "You want to understand what's happening here. Very well, I'll tell you the truth." Creedy gestured to the skulls lining the walls. "Every soul you see here came to this island willingly. They were drawn by dreams, by visions, by promises of peace. They thought they were escaping their troubles. Instead, they found their purpose." "You're the thing from the caves," Ray whispered. Creedy laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I am merely its voice, detective, its herald. The hungry one has been sleeping for so long that it needed someone to prepare the way. Someone to gather the offerings. For how long? Since the first ship wrecked on these shores. Every 2 years, I choose someone to join our congregation. Every 2 years, I add to our strength. But now," Creedy's smile widened impossibly. "Now it's time for the final harvest." Ray felt the marks on his palms burning. "What final harvest? You've already done your part, detective. Your reports to the mainland, your calls for backup, they're bringing exactly what we need. By dawn, there will be 50 more souls on this island. Police officers, coroners, forensics experts, reporters, all of them will become part of our congregation. Ray's blood turned to ice. He had called for backup. He had filed reports. In his rational, detective mind, he had followed procedure and summoned help. Help that would arrive directly into the trap. "And when we have their souls," Grady continued, "the Hungry One will finally have enough strength to wake fully. And when it wakes, it will no longer be confined to this small island. It will spread across the waters, consuming every coastal town, every fishing village, every port city. It will turn the entire North Atlantic into its hunting ground." Ray found his voice. "I won't let that happen." "You can't stop it, Detective. You bear the mark. You belong to us now." But Ray was already moving. He grabbed one of the skull-filled bookshelves and pulled it down, sending bones cascading across the floor. Grady shrieked and lunged at him, but Ray was ready. He had noticed something about the skulls. They were all marked with the 3 circles, but some of the marks were different. Some looked burned in, permanent, but others looked like they had been carved or painted on, as if they were fake, as if some of the souls hadn't truly been claimed. Ray grabbed a skull with painted marks and smashed it against the floor. The moment it broke, he heard a sound like a sigh of relief and felt something change in the air around him. He grabbed another skull, then another, smashing every one he could reach. Each broken skull weakened Grady's hold, made the false heralds scream and flail. "You don't understand," Grady shrieked. "Without the Hungry One's guidance, this world will tear itself apart with greed and violence and hate." "Maybe," Ray said, smashing the last of the fake skulls. "But that's humanity's choice to make." Grady's form began to waver and fade. You can't. The cycle must continue." "The cycle ends here," Ray said. And with that, William Grady dissolved into smoke and shadow, leaving behind only the smell of sulfur and decay. But Ray's victory was short-lived. Even as Grady disappeared, Ray could feel the island shaking beneath his feet. The Hungry One was waking up, and it was very, very angry. The ground cracked open beneath Ray's feet, revealing glimpses of the vast cavern below. The thing that had been sleeping beneath Corpon Island was stirring, and its rage was shaking the very foundations of reality. Ray ran through streets that were dissolving around him, past houses that were melting like wax, through air that tasted of brimstone and despair. The chosen ones, the transformed residents of the island, were screaming as their false purpose was stripped away, leaving them aware of what they had become. But their screams were nothing compared to the roar that erupted from the depths of the earth. The Hungry One was awake, and it was furious that its careful plans had been disrupted. Ray reached the harbor just as the first boats appeared on the horizon. His backup was arriving, just as Grady had predicted. But instead of sailing into a trap, they were sailing into a war zone. The waters around the island began to boil as something massive rose from the depths. Ray caught glimpses of it through the churning foam. Tentacles the size of subway trains, eyes like burning suns, flesh that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. The Hungry One had finally revealed its true form, and it was more terrible than anything Ray's mind could have imagined. The creature's voice echoed across the water, no longer speaking in words but in pure, distilled hatred. It had been denied its feast, and now it would take what it wanted by force. Ray watched in horror as the rescue boats were caught in massive tentacles and lifted from the water. But instead of crushing them, the creature held them carefully, as if examining their contents. Ray realized with sickening clarity that the Hungry One was trying to decide which souls would be most nutritious. That was when Ray made his choice. He had seen enough horror for one lifetime. He had learned secrets that no human mind should know, and he had a job to do. Ray pulled out the emergency flare from his jacket, standard equipment for maritime operations, and fired it directly at the creature's largest eye. The Hungry One's scream of pain and rage shattered every piece of glass on the island and sent shockwaves that could be felt on the mainland. But more importantly, it released the boats, sending them crashing back into the churning sea. "Get away from here," Ray screamed across the water. "Get away and never come back." The surviving boats turned and fled, their crews having seen enough to know that some places should be left alone. But the Hungry One wasn't finished. Denied its feast, robbed of its herald, it began to sink back beneath the waves, but not to sleep. Ray could see it in the creature's burning eyes. It was retreating to find another place, another island, another group of people to corrupt and consume, and Ray would be left behind to tell the tale. 3 days later, Ray sat in a Coast Guard helicopter, watching Korpan Island shrink behind him. The island looked normal from the air, just a small chunk of rock and grass poking up from the North Atlantic. No sign of the horror that had unfolded there. The rescue teams had found Ray alone on the beach, half mad with exposure and babbling about monsters and chosen ones and things that knocked at doors. They'd found evidence of a fire that had consumed several buildings and some unusual geological activity, but nothing that couldn't be explained by natural causes. The 46 other residents of Korpan Island had simply vanished. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. The official report would list them as missing persons, presumed drowned in a boating accident during the storm that had hit the area 3 nights earlier. Ray knew better, but who would believe him? "You were lucky, Detective," said the Coast Guard medic who was monitoring his vital signs. "Few more hours in that cold, and you would have joined your missing persons list." Ray nodded, but didn't speak. He was looking at his hands, at the 3 black circles that were still burned into his palms. The marks that proved everything had been real. As the helicopter carried him away from Korpan Island, Ray made himself a promise. He would never speak of what had really happened there. He would file his report, take his mandatory psychiatric leave, and try to forget. But he would also keep watching, keep listening, because the Hungry One was still out there, still looking for a new place to set up shop. And when it found that place, when reports started coming in of strange disappearances and mysterious knockings at 3 a.m., Ray would be ready, because some evils are too dangerous to face alone, and some truths are too terrible to share. 6 months later, Detective Ray Holbrook sat in his apartment in St. John's, reading the morning paper. Most of the news was the usual mix of politics and sports, but one small item on page 7 caught his attention. Trinity Bay Fishing Village reports unusual disappearances. Local authorities in the small fishing community of Heart's Content are investigating the disappearance of 3 residents who went missing over the past week. The missing persons, elderly fisherman Thomas Wells, local shopkeeper Sarah Manning, and retired schoolteacher Dorothy Chen, were all reported missing by neighbors who say they heard strange knocking sounds coming from the missing persons' homes around 3 a.m. on the nights they disappeared. "It's probably just coincidence," said local RCMP Constable James Murphy. "Could be anything. Wild animals, settling houses, you name it. But we're taking it seriously and investigating all possibilities." Heart's Content, population 94, is a historic fishing village located on Trinity Bay, approximately 200 kilometers from St. John's. Ray set down the paper with shaking hands. He looked at his palms, where 3 black circles were still burned into his flesh, and felt a familiar chill run down his spine. The Hungry One had found its new home. Ray reached for his phone to call his supervisor, then stopped. What would he say? That an ancient cosmic entity was setting up shop in a new fishing village? That it would spend the next few years carefully building up its strength before attempting another feeding frenzy? Who would believe him? Instead, Ray grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Heart's Content was 3 hours away by car. If he left now, he might arrive before the thing had time to fully establish itself. He might be able to warn people, evacuate them, do something to prevent another Korpan Island. But as he drove through the Newfoundland countryside, Ray couldn't shake the feeling that he was already too late. The Hungry One was patient, cunning, and it learned from its mistakes. It wouldn't underestimate human resistance again. And this time, Ray would be walking into its trap alone. As the sun set behind him, painting the sky the color of dried blood, Ray drove toward Heart's Content and whatever fresh hell awaited him there. Behind him, carried on the evening wind, he could swear he heard the distant sound of knocking. Knock, knock, knock. Patient, deliberate, hungry. The cycle was beginning again.